My friends, pain is an unwelcome visitor, one we often wish to banish from our lives. Yet, in the grand tapestry of existence, it is not without purpose. God, in His infinite wisdom, weaves even the threads of suffering into patterns that, though hidden to us, are rich with meaning. When we face trials, it is tempting to cry out, "Where is God in this?" But silence does not imply absence. A teacher is often quietest during a test, allowing the student to demonstrate what they have learned. So it is with God. In His quietness, He invites us to trust. Not blindly, but with the assurance that His love is steadfast, even when unseen. We, as finite beings, often misconstrue pain. We see it as punishment, a senseless cruelty. Yet, could it be that we misunderstand its purpose? Like a surgeon's scalpel, pain is sharp and unpleasant, but ultimately brings healing. It cuts away what is diseased to preserve what is vital. Consider the role of free will. In granting us this sacred gift, God risked our misuse of it. The pain we inflict on ourselves and others is not His design, but a consequence of our choices. Yet, even this is not beyond His redemption. For in our brokenness He reveals the depth of His grace. We are often fixated on the present, weighed down by our suffering. But God sees beyond the horizon of time. What seems unbearable now is but a fleeting moment in the light of eternity. The Apostle Paul once declared that our present sufferings are not worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed in us. How then can we despair when such a promise awaits? Pain has a curious way of humbling us, stripping away our illusions of self-sufficiency. In our weakness, we discover strength, not our own, but His. It is in the furnace of trials that God refines us, drawing us closer to His heart. Above all, let us remember that love is at the center of God's every action. Even His tests, though painful, are rooted in love. He seeks not to harm but to transform, to bring us into a fuller knowledge of Him and His purposes. As we embrace His very strength, time and time again, we gain strength. So when you find yourself in the midst of a painful test, do not lose heart. Trust in the One who sees the end from the beginning. Trust that the God who allows the pain also holds the promise, and in Him all things, even the most painful, are being made new. In our journey through life, one of the most perplexing and painful experiences we often encounter is the silence of God. This silence can seem like an absence, a void where we expect to hear His voice, feel His presence, or find His guidance. When faced with suffering, hardship, or confusion, we cry out, "Why aren't you speaking to me, God? Where are you when I need you most?" And yet, it is in these very moments of silence that a profound truth is revealed. Not an absence of God, but rather an invitation to trust Him more deeply than we ever thought possible. To many, God's silence can appear to be cruelty or indifference. We are conditioned in our human relationships to expect communication and responsiveness. When someone we love goes silent, it can signal a breakdown in the relationship. But with God, silence does not indicate the same thing. It does not suggest that He has abandoned us or that He is uninterested in our struggles. Rather, it is an opportunity, an invitation even, into a deeper relationship based on trust rather than immediate answers. Consider the story of Job, a man who was blameless in God's sight, but who was subjected to unimaginable suffering. Job did not understand why his life was unraveling, why his friends turned against him, or why he was experiencing such pain. And yet, throughout the majority of his trials, God remained silent. Job, in his agony, demanded answers, seeking a reason, a justification for the calamities that had befallen him. Sometimes, conspicuously so that the weight of excuse was revealed. Yet God did not speak for most of his suffering. It was only later, after Job had endured the silence, that God spoke to him out of the whirlwind, revealing the vastness of his wisdom and the limitations of Job's understanding. Why did God remain silent for so long? Was it because he did not care? Certainly not. It was because, in his silence, God was inviting Job to trust him beyond the limits of his understanding. God knew that Job's faith was not to be found in an answer to his questions, but in a relationship with a God whose wisdom and love transcended his comprehension. Silence, then, was not God's abandonment. It was his call to trust, to lean not on our understanding, but on his infinite knowledge and goodness. There are times when we feel the silence of God most acutely, not when things are going well, but when we are in the midst of great trial or pain. In those moments we may feel abandoned, forgotten, or even rejected by the very one who claims to love us. And yet, it is precisely in those times that God's silence becomes his most profound word to us. He is not absent in our pain. Rather, he is there with us, waiting for us to trust him without needing to understand every detail. In the silence, he asks us to rely on him, not for the answers, but for the presence that sustains us in the midst of the storm. It is easy to trust when we see the way ahead, when everything makes sense. But real trust is forged in the darkness, in the silence. It is in those moments when we have no choice but to lean into God's character, to believe in his goodness even when we cannot see it. Silence challenges us to let go of our need for control, for certainty, and to surrender our lives into the hands of the one who sees the beginning from the end. In his silence, God also invites us to discover the depth of our own faith. Do we trust God for what we want, or do we trust him for who he is, regardless of our circumstances? The silence of God reveals the purity of our hearts. It strips away the superficial and invites us into a more intimate and authentic relationship with him. The divine silence is not the absence of God, but the space in which our trust can grow. It is a testing ground for our faith, a place where we are called to move beyond the need for answers and to embrace the deeper truth that God is with us, even when we cannot hear him. His silence is not punishment, but an invitation to surrender, to trust, and to walk with him even when the road ahead is unclear. It is in this silence that God's presence is most powerfully felt. Not because he is speaking, but because he is holding us in the stillness, drawing us closer to himself. Both rich and poor. Pain is an experience most of us would prefer to avoid, yet it is an inevitable part of life. Whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, pain has a way of invading our lives at unexpected moments, often bringing with it deep questions about its meaning and purpose. Why does God allow pain to exist in a world he created? Why must we endure such suffering, sometimes for reasons we cannot comprehend? The answer lies not in the pain itself, but in its purpose. A purpose that transcends the immediate discomfort and leads us towards something far greater. At its most basic level, pain serves as a signal. It is an alert system, warning us that something is wrong, whether it be in our bodies, our relationships, or our hearts. Without pain, we would not know when something is broken or in need of attention. Physical pain, for instance, compels us to care for an injury, seek medical help, and protect ourselves from further harm. Emotional pain, too, signals when something deeper is off balance in our lives, urging us to address unresolved issues, seek reconciliation, or grow in self-awareness. Pain is not a random affliction. It is a mechanism that helps us recognize what needs to be healed or transformed. There is no such thing as pain. It is a mechanism that helps us recognize what needs to be healed or transformed. However, pain's purpose stretches far beyond mere awareness of brokenness. It serves as a refining tool, a means of growth and development. Much like a blacksmith uses fire to refine metal, God uses pain to refine us. It is through the trials of life that our character is shaped, our faith tested, and our dependence on Him deepened. Without pain, we might become complacent, resting in the comforts of ease and security, never moving beyond our current limitations. It is the very discomfort of pain that pushes us to grow, to stretch, and to reach beyond ourselves. In the discomfort, we are forced to confront our weaknesses and imperfections, allowing us to become more resilient and compassionate. Through pain, we also gain perspective. When everything is going well, it is easy to forget our need for God. We become self-sufficient, relying on our own strength and understanding. But when we are brought low by pain, we are reminded of our vulnerability, our need for something greater than ourselves. Pain strips away the illusions of control, revealing to us the frailty of human existence. It brings us face to face with our limitations and with the harsh realities of life. And in that place of vulnerability, we are given the opportunity to discover the deeper truths of God's nature, that He is our strength in weakness, our comfort in sorrow, and our hope in despair. The purpose of pain is also found in its potential for transformation. Pain is not meant to be a static experience, something we simply endure. It has the capacity to change us. In the midst of suffering, we are given the opportunity to reflect on our lives and our relationship with God. Pain challenges us to reevaluate what is truly important, to surrender our idols and false securities, and to reorient our hearts toward eternal values. In this way, pain becomes a catalyst for spiritual growth. It teaches us perseverance, patience, and humility. It refines our understanding of love, compassion, and grace as we learn to lean into God and rely on His strength rather than our own. Moreover, pain reveals the depth of God's love for us. In our suffering, we are drawn nearer to Him. God, in His infinite mercy, does not abandon us in our pain. Rather, He walks with us through it. The pain we experience is not something He takes pleasure in, but it is something He allows for our greater good. The same God who endured the ultimate pain on the cross for our sake is present with us in our own suffering, offering His comfort, His peace, and His strength. Through His presence, our pain becomes a means of intimacy with Him, a way for us to experience His love and care in a more profound way. In the grand scheme of life, pain serves as a reminder that we are not created for this world alone. Our ultimate purpose is not found in avoiding suffering, but in growing through it, in allowing it to shape us into the people God intends for us to be. While we may never fully understand the reasons behind every painful experience, we can trust that God, in His wisdom, has a purpose for it. Pain is not pointless or meaningless. It is a tool for transformation, a means of refining our hearts and minds, and a way of drawing us closer to the God who loves us beyond measure. Human limitation is something we are all familiar with. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we encounter it daily in both grand and small ways. We find ourselves unable to solve a complex problem, to fully comprehend the vastness of the universe, or to heal the brokenness within our hearts. It is humbling, often frustrating, and sometimes even painful to confront our limitations. Yet, within these limitations lies a profound truth about our nature and our relationship with God. At the heart of human limitation is our finiteness. Unlike God, who is infinite and eternal, we are bound by time, space, and understanding. We cannot see the future or control the past. Our vision is limited not only by our senses, but also by our understanding. We often look at the world around us and think we grasp its workings. Yet the complexity of life and creation stretches beyond our comprehension. We see only in part, as through a glass darkly, and the more we know, the more we realize how much we do not know. This limitation is not something we choose or desire, but it is an inherent aspect of our existence. It is a reminder that we are not the center of the universe, nor are we in control of all that happens around us. We are creatures, dependent on something greater than ourselves. Our human limitations often confront us when we least expect it, when we are faced with challenges that seem insurmountable. Whether it is a personal tragedy, a global crisis, or a simple day-to-day struggle, we are often reminded of just how little control we truly have. My own feeling of frustration with the broken messaging scheme as well. It takes away the sense of control, and it creates a feeling of lack of control that fills us with shame and even regret. But this recognition of limitation is not necessarily a negative thing. In fact, it is essential for growth and humility. It is only when we acknowledge our limitations that we begin to grow beyond them. For many, the struggle with limitation becomes a source of strength. We are driven to learn more, to discover new ways of thinking, to expand our abilities, and to stretch the boundaries of what we can do. Limitations are not necessarily barriers. They are starting points, opportunities for us to explore, grow, and push beyond our current state. One of the most significant areas where human limitations are exposed is in our ability to understand and deal with suffering. We often cannot comprehend why bad things happen to good people, why pain is allowed to exist in the world, or why God remains silent in the midst of our distress. We search for answers, trying to make sense of suffering, yet we find that our human capacity to understand is insufficient. We want to know why, and we often find ourselves frustrated by the lack of clear explanations. In these moments, we are reminded that we are not all-knowing. Our limited perspective can only see part of the picture, whereas God, with His infinite wisdom, sees the whole. This is why the Bible says in the 10 Commandments, "I saw God's face clearly when I read the 10 Commandments." Appeared to the Jews the vision of a God with His infinite wisdom sees the whole. This limitation is also revealed in our relationships with others. We often struggle to understand the hearts and minds of those around us, whether family, friends, or strangers. We try to bridge the gap between our experiences and those of others, but we cannot fully enter into another person's world. Our empathy, though valuable, is inherently limited by our own experiences. This limitation can lead to misunderstandings, frustration, and even feelings of isolation. Yet, in recognizing our limitations, we are offered a path to greater humility and compassion. We are reminded that just as we cannot fully understand another's pain, others may not fully understand ours. But this shared limitation brings us closer, creating space for grace, patience, and love. Moreover, human limitation underscores the necessity of faith. In our limited understanding, we are called to trust in the one who is not limited. We are called to believe in God's goodness, even when we cannot see the way forward. Faith is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to trust beyond our limited vision. It is the acknowledgement that, though we may not have all the answers, we trust in the character of God, who sees what we cannot. Our limitations can also point us toward our dependence on God. The truth is, we were never meant to be self-sufficient. The recognition of our limitations is an invitation to rely on God, to lean on His wisdom, strength, and grace. The Apostle Paul writes about a time when he struggled with what he called a thorn in the flesh. He pleaded with God to remove it, but God's response was not to take it away. Instead, God told him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." In that moment, Paul recognized that his limitations were not something to be ashamed of, but rather an opportunity for God's power to be displayed. Paul reflected on this for a while. Right now, even in this moment, God must strive for the future with me. In a world that often values self-sufficiency and independence, embracing human limitations is counterintuitive. Yet it is in our limitations that we find our truest dependence on God. As finite beings, we cannot navigate life alone. We need God, and our limitations remind us of that truth. They are not a burden to bear in isolation, but a call to surrender our pride and embrace the one who is limitless. Through our weaknesses, God's strength is made manifest, and in our limitations, we find His grace. Thus, human limitation, while humbling, becomes the pathway to greater understanding, growth, and a deeper relationship with the divine. Free will is one of the most profound and challenging aspects of the human experience. It is a gift and a responsibility, an essential part of what it means to be human. Yet, it is also a source of deep complexity, as it comes with consequences and challenges that can be difficult to fully grasp. At its core, free will is the ability to choose, to make decisions and act upon them, to decide how we will respond to the world around us. It is the power to shape our own lives and destinies, to determine who we will become. But with this power comes the possibility of failure, the risk of choosing wrongly, and the weight of the consequences that follow. From the moment we are born, we are presented with choices. Our lives are shaped by the decisions we make, whether big or small. We can choose to love or hate, to forgive or harbor resentment, to seek truth or harbor resentment. We can choose to follow the path of righteousness or wander down paths of selfishness, greed, or despair. In each of these decisions we exercise our free will, but this freedom to choose is not without its limitations or challenges. We are not born with perfect knowledge or understanding. We are not omniscient. Our choices are often influenced by our upbringing, our environment, our emotions, and our desires. Our will, though free, is not always informed by perfect wisdom. And this is where the true difficulty of free will lies. We are free to choose, but we are not always equipped to choose rightly. The gift of free will, while empowering, is also a burden. We are responsible for our choices, and the consequences of those choices can be far-reaching. When we choose wrongly, when we make decisions that harm ourselves or others, we bear the weight of those choices. We may cause pain, suffering, or damage, and we may struggle to undo the harm that has been done. This is one of the most difficult aspects of free will, the knowledge that our choices have consequences, both in the present and in the future. Yet it is precisely this responsibility that makes our choices meaningful. If we were not free to choose, our actions would have no moral weight. We would be mere puppets acting according to a predetermined script, with no true agency or significance in our decisions. However, free will is not just about the consequences of our actions, it is also about the opportunity for growth and transformation. The choices we make shape our character. They reveal who we are and who we are becoming. When we choose kindness over cruelty, integrity over deceit, or love over hate, we are not only making a moral decision, we are also shaping the kind of person we will be. Free will is the arena in which we can choose to become more like the person we were meant to be. It is through the exercise of free will that we are able to grow, to learn, and to mature in ways that would not be possible if our choices were not truly our own. Children look up to their parents. The role of free will also becomes apparent in our relationship with God. God, in His wisdom, chose to give humanity free will from the very beginning. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were given the choice to obey God or to rebel against Him. The ability to choose was central to the creation of humanity. God did not create us to be automatons, simply following His commands without thought or intention. God did not create us to be automatons, simply following His commands without thought or intention. He created us with the capacity to choose, to love Him or reject Him, to follow His path or to go our own way. In this sense, free will is at the heart of our relationship with God. It is through our choices that we enter into communion with Him, and it is through our choices that we either draw closer to Him or distance ourselves from Him. Yet, with free will comes the possibility of rejecting God. The existence of evil in the world can be traced back to the misuse of free will. When Adam and Eve chose to disobey God, they exercised their free will in a way that brought about separation from God and introduced suffering into the world. The same free will that allows us to love God also allows us to reject Him. This is the paradox of free will. It is a gift that gives us the power to choose love, but it also allows for the possibility of evil and suffering. In allowing free will, God did not want robots, but creatures who could truly choose to love and serve Him. Love, after all, cannot be forced. It must be chosen freely, and that freedom to choose includes the possibility of choosing otherwise. The role of free will, then, is not merely about making decisions in the moment. It is about the kind of person we become through those choices. It is about taking responsibility for our actions and recognizing that our choices are significant, shaping not only our own lives, but also the lives of those around us. Free will is the path to both growth and suffering, but it is also the means by which we can experience love, grace, and redemption. In our freedom to choose, we are given the opportunity to align our will with God's, to grow in wisdom and compassion, and to become the people we were created to be. It is in exercising our free will with humility, integrity, and love that we fulfill our highest calling as human beings. Life is filled with moments of joy, sorrow, triumph, and struggle, and it is easy to become consumed by the immediate concerns and challenges that surround us. We often focus on the here and now, shaping our decisions and priorities around what feels urgent or pressing. However, there is a transformative power in cultivating an eternal perspective, a way of viewing life that transcends the temporary and embraces the timeless truths of eternity. It is a perspective that reminds us that our existence is not limited to this earthly life, but is part of a much grander and everlasting story. An eternal perspective begins with the recognition that our time on earth is fleeting. Scripture often compares human life to a vapor or a fleeting shadow. Here today and gone tomorrow. This imagery is not meant to diminish the value of our lives, but to highlight their transitory nature. The brevity of life encourages us to consider what truly matters. It urges us to shift our focus from the temporary achievements, possessions, and accolades that so often captivate our attention, and instead prioritize what will endure beyond this life. In doing so, we begin to invest in things of eternal significance: faith, love, relationships, and the pursuit of God's kingdom. When we adopt an eternal perspective, we gain clarity about our purpose. Instead of being driven by the pursuit of wealth, status, or comfort, we are drawn toward a higher calling, to live in alignment with God's will and to reflect His love and goodness in the world. We begin to see our daily actions and choices as part of a larger narrative. Every decision, no matter how small, has the potential to ripple into eternity. These are the foundations and choices as part of a larger narrative. Every decision, no matter how small, has the potential to ripple into eternity. Acts of kindness, moments of forgiveness, and efforts to share God's truth are not fleeting gestures. They are seeds planted in the soil of eternity, bearing fruit that we may not fully comprehend in this life. This perspective also transforms the way we view suffering. Pain and hardship, while difficult, are no longer seen as meaningless or insurmountable. Instead, they become opportunities for growth, refinement, and a deeper reliance on God. An eternal perspective helps us understand that our suffering, though real and painful, is temporary and light of eternity. As the Apostle Paul wrote, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." This does not minimize our struggles, but places them in the context of a greater hope, a hope that sustains us through life's darkest valleys. An eternal perspective also redefines our relationships. When we view others through the lens of eternity, we begin to see their infinite worth and value. Every person we encounter is a soul created by God, loved by Him, and destined for eternity. This understanding challenges us to treat others with compassion, dignity, and respect. It compels us to share the hope of the gospel, knowing that the choices we make in this life have eternal implications. Our relationships are no longer defined by convenience or self-interest, but by a desire to reflect God's love and draw others closer to Him. Moreover, an eternal perspective brings a sense of peace and hope in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain. When we focus solely on the temporal, we can become overwhelmed by the challenges and injustices of the present. But when we look to eternity, we are reminded that God's plan is unfolding according to His perfect will. Thank you for watching.